Picture this. It's 11 p.m. the night before, what should be the happiest day of your life. Your mother hands you a cup of warm tea for your nerves. Sweetheart, you trust her, you drink it, and that's when your world shatters forever. As the sedative kicked in, I heard my sister's voice cut through the darkness, like a blade cut her hair off, or you'll lose me forever, through my drugged haze. I watched my own mother pick up electric clippers, the woman who raised me, who promised to love me unconditionally. She chose my golden child sister over me in that moment. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's standing with me in this community. The morning light didn't wake me. It was the silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that only exists in a house full of secrets. I opened my eyes, and for a second, I didn't remember. I was just Haley, waking up in the guest suite of my parents' estate on Martha's Vineyard. The fog outside was thick, pressing against the window panes like a gray wall, hiding the ocean, hiding the world. Then I sat up, and the world tilted. My head felt light, too light. My hand went up, expecting the familiar weight of my long hair, the hair I'd spent 3 years growing out for this wedding. Instead, my palm met skin, rough, uneven skin. I froze. The memory of the night before crashed into me like a rogue wave. The tea. The paralysis. The buzzing. I scrambled out of bed, my legs still shaky from the drugs, and stumbled to the vanity mirror. I didn't scream. I think I was too hollowed out to scream. I just stared. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. My scalp was bare, nicked in places where the clippers had bitten too deep, raw and angry. And right there, sitting on the marble countertop next to a crystal vase of white hydrangeas, were the shears, not hair shears, dog grooming shears. The heavy, industrial kind they used for the family's prize-winning show dogs. They hadn't just cut my hair. They had dehumanized me. They had used a tool meant for animals to strip me of my dignity. Next to the shears lay a wig, a blonde, perfectly styled wig that looked exactly like my sister Gabriella's hair. And a note from my mother, Catherine. Wear this. Do not ruin the aesthetic. We will discuss your behavior later. My behavior. I was the one who had been assaulted, yet I was the problem to be managed. I stared at that wig. It was a lifeline back to their approval. If I put it on, I could walk down the aisle, play the part, and keep the peace. I could disappear again, but then I looked at the dog shears. I picked them up, feeling the cold steel. This wasn't discipline, this was disposal. They had thrown me away, and in that moment, the fear that had ruled my life for 29 years evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I turned away from the wig. I walked to the wall, safe in the closet. I knew the combination. I'd installed it myself during the last renovation. Inside was the family's heirloom jewelry, brought out for the wedding. I bypassed the pearls, the tasteful diamonds. I reached for the one piece my mother said was too ostentatious for modern times. The Romanov tiara. A heavy, intricate crown of diamonds and platinum. I took it out. I walked back to the mirror. I didn't try to hide the scars. I didn't try to soften the look. I placed the tiara directly on my bald, scarred scalp. The diamonds blazed against the raw skin. It looked violent. It looked regal. It looked like war. I wasn't going to be their victim today. I was going to be their reckoning. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the fog swirl, and let my mind drift back, not to last night, but to the moment this really started. It wasn't yesterday, it was 2 weeks ago, in the library. The memory was sharp, unclouded by sedatives. My father, Richard, sitting behind his mahogany desk, looking like the retired judge he was imposing, untouchable. My mother, Catherine, pacing by the fireplace. And Gabriella, my sister, curled on the leather sofa, sobbing into a silk handkerchief. Fix it, Haley, my father had said. He didn't ask, he commanded. Your sister has made a mistake, that's what they called it. Gabriella had gambled away $250,000. Not her money. Campaign funds. Money from the Political Action Committee my father still advised. If the press found out, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be prison. It would be the end of the dynasty. Gabriella looked up, her eyes swollen but her gaze sharp. "If this gets out," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and malice, "I'm not going down alone. I'll tell them everything. The offshore accounts, the bribes, everything." It was blackmail, pure and simple. She was holding the family hostage, and the price of her silence wasn't money. It was me. "I need to know you're loyal," she'd said, turning to look at me. "Haley always gets to be the good one. The perfect one. I want her to hurt. I want her to lose something." My father didn't slap her. He didn't throw her out. He turned to the sideboard and poured a glass of vintage port. "The good stuff." He walked over to me and held it out. "Drink," he said. "To family unity." I looked at the wine. It was dark, rich, opaque. I knew, deep down, that taking that glass was signing a contract I couldn't read, but I took it. Why? Why did I drink it? Because I was a prisoner who loved the jailer. For 29 years, I had been trained to believe that my only value lay in my utility. I was the fixer. The one who smoothed things over. The one who absorbed the pain so they didn't have to. It's like a chain you can't see. You think you're free because the door is unlocked, but you never leave. You stay because the familiar pain feels safer than the unknown. I drank the wine because I thought if I just gave them one more thing, one more sacrifice, they would finally love me. I drank it because I didn't know how to exist without their approval. I drank it, and the last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Gabriella smiling. Now, sitting in the gray morning light with a crown of thorns made of diamonds on my head, I realized the truth. That wine wasn't a toast, it was a test. And I had failed. Not because I wasn't loyal, but because I was too loyal. I had let them turn me into a commodity. But commodities don't bleed. And today, I was going to make sure they saw every drop. I stood up. The heavy silk of my dressing gown rustled in the quiet room. It was time to go downstairs. It was time to show them what they had made. I opened the door to the hallway. The house was quiet. That hushed, expensive silence of a staff working invisibly. I walked barefoot on the plush carpet. The tiara heavy on my head, I reached the landing of the grand staircase and stopped. Voices drifted up from the foyer. My mother's voice. Sharp, distinct, carrying that tone she used for donors and senators, warm on the surface. Absolute zero underneath. "It's tragic, really," she was saying. "We've been so worried about her. The stress of the wedding. It's triggered something. A complete psychotic break." I froze. I peered over the banister. She was talking to Senator Miller. I could see the top of his bald head, nodding sympathetically. "We're doing our best to manage it," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But if you see anything odd today, just ignore it. Poor Haley is not herself. She might do something for attention. It's a cry for help, really." The whisper campaign. It was brilliant. It was evil. They weren't hiding what they did. They were reframing it. If I walked out there bald, they wouldn't see a victim of abuse. They would see a crazy woman. My mother was inoculating the audience against my truth. She was turning my evidence into a symptom. I looked down into the garden through the tall French windows. Gabriella was there. She was wearing a white sundress, laughing with a group of bridesmaids. Holding a mimosa. She looked untouched. Radiant. She was the picture of health, while I was being painted as the disease. And that's when I understood the mechanism. It wasn't just cruelty, it was structural. In every sick system, there is a scapegoat, an identified patient. The family needs one person to carry all the darkness, all the dysfunction, so the rest of them can pretend they are full of light. They didn't just hurt me because they were angry. They hurt me because they needed to project their own rot onto someone else. If I was the crazy one, then Gabriella wasn't a thief, my father wasn't a monster, and my mother wasn't an enabler. They needed me to be broken, so they could feel whole. I descended the stairs. I didn't hide. I walked straight toward the solarium, where my mother was now adjusting a flower arrangement. She sensed me before she saw me. She turned, her smile ready for a guest, but it died the second she saw the tiara blazing against my scarred skin. "Haley," she hissed. looking around frantically to ensure the senator had moved on. She marched over, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble. "What have you done? Take that off. You look like a monster." "I look like your daughter," I said. My voice was calm. It scared her. She reached into her purse and pulled out the blonde wig I had left upstairs. She shoved it into my chest. "Put this on. Right now. You will not ruin this day. Do you hear me? The senator is here. The donors are here." "No," I said. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "If you step outside that door looking like this, I will cut you off. The trust fund, the allowance, the access, it's gone. You will be destitute, Haley. Do you understand? I will ruin you." She wasn't looking at my injuries. She wasn't asking if I was in pain. She was calculating the PR cost of my scalp. "You can't cut me off from what I don't want anymore," I said. "Put it on," she commanded, her voice trembling with a rage she could barely contain. I looked at the wig in her hand, then I looked at her. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a matriarch. I saw a terrified woman trying to hold together a castle made of sand. "I think I'll go to the library," I said. "I have some reading to do before the ceremony." I walked past her. I didn't look back. I left her standing there with the wig in her hand, realizing for the first time that her threats were just words. And words don't work on someone who has already lost everything. The library was the only room in the estate that felt real. It smelled of old paper, leather, and the kind of silence that wasn't heavy with secrets, just heavy with dust. I closed the heavy oak door behind me and locked it. The click of the latch was the first satisfying sound I'd heard all day. I didn't collapse. I didn't weep. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my silk robe and sent a single text to Ethan. "Start the car. Have it running at the service entrance in 45 minutes. He didn't ask why. He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Ethan was a tech entrepreneur. He understood systems, and he understood that when a system was corrupted, you didn't patch it, you rebooted it. Or you smashed the server. I turned around. Mr. Sterling was standing in the shadows of the alcove, cleaning his glasses. He was the family's fixer, a man who had buried my father's drunk driving incidents and my mother's employment lawsuits for 30 years. To my parents, he was a piece of furniture necessary, expensive, and entirely owned. "You look." He paused, placing his glasses back on his nose. His eyes didn't flinch at the sight of my scarred scalp or the diamond tiara. "You look ready. Is it done?" I asked. He walked over to the desk and slid a thick manila envelope across the polished wood. "The irrevocable trust transfer was finalized at 9 a.m. when the markets opened. The assets are now in a separate holding company under your name. Your mother can scream all she wants. She can't touch a dime." I placed my hand on the file. It felt warmer than it should have. This was my mother's leverage. Her favorite weapon, financial annihilation. And Mr. Sterling, the man she thought was her loyal dog, had just disarmed her. "Why?" I asked him. "You've served them for decades." Sterling smiled, a thin, wintry expression. "Because your father treats the staff like livestock. And because you're the only one in this house who ever remembered my wife's name. Loyalty is a currency, Haley. They spent theirs a long time ago." He turned to leave. "I'll be in the car with Ethan. I suggest you find what you're looking for quickly." I sat at my father's desk. It felt like trespassing, which made it all the better. I opened my laptop and connected to the estate's secure Wi-Fi. My parents thought technology was something you hired people to manage. They didn't understand the cloud. They didn't understand that every device in this house was synced. I logged into the family's shared server. I wasn't looking for financial records. Sterling had those. I was looking for something else. Something visceral. I navigated to the folder labeled Uploads. And there it was. A file timestamped 2:14 a.m. The uploader was Gabriella's iPhone. My sister lived her life for an audience. She couldn't eat a salad without broadcasting it. Why would a felony be any different? I clicked play. The video quality was crisp. It wasn't a recording she'd meant to save, it was a screen capture of a private live stream. She had broadcast my assault to a private group chat, titled, "The Inner Circle." On the screen, I saw myself, slumped in the chair, eyes glassy. I saw my mother's hands holding the dog shears. But it was the audio that turned my blood to ice. "Do it fast!" My father's voice rumbled from off-camera. "Before the sedative wears off. We need her pliable for the wig fitting in the morning." "Look at her," Gabriella's voice narrated, giggling. "She looks like a shaved rat. This is what happens when you forget your place, Haley." She panned the camera to herself, winking. Loyalty check passed. Now. Who wants to see the dress? She hadn't just watched, she had turned my torture into content. But in her narcissism, she had forgotten the auto-archive setting on the family cloud. She had handed me the smoking gun, the bullets, and the fingerprints. I didn't feel sick anymore, I felt surgical. I downloaded the file. I plugged in the flash drive I'd prepared. I transferred the video, the audio, the metadata. I closed the laptop. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I wasn't just walking into a wedding ceremony. I was walking into a courtroom, and I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The wind on the lighthouse bluff was biting, carrying the salt spray that had weathered the estate's gray shingles for a century. It was the kind of wind that stripped away pretense, leaving only the structural truth underneath. Perfect weather for an execution. I stood behind the double doors of the lighthouse foyer. I could hear the string quartet playing something baroque and intricate. A polite mask over the brutality of the morning. I adjusted the Romanov tiara. The metal was cold against my scarred skin, a heavy, grounding weight. My mother had wanted a fairy tale. I was about to give her a tragedy. The doors opened. The wind hit me first, billowing the silk of my dress, but it had nothing to grab onto on my head. I stepped out onto the grass runner. The silence that fell over the 300 guests wasn't the hush of reverence, it was the silence of a car crash. It was the vacuum of oxygen leaving a room. I saw them all turn. The senators in their dark suits, the donors in their pastel finery, the socialites who traded gossip like currency. They looked at the bride, and they saw the raw, jagged tracks of the clippers. They saw the angry red welts. They saw the diamonds crowning the wreckage. A gasp rippled through the crowd, starting from the back and crashing toward the front. It sounded like a collective intake of breath, before a scream. I didn't look down. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a landscape architect surveying a demolition site. I locked eyes with my mother in the front row. Catherine was clutching her pearls so hard her knuckles were white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The psychotic break narrative she'd planted was crumbling in real time. Insanity looks chaotic. This was precision. This was composure. She wasn't looking at a crazy daughter. She was looking at a mirror, reflecting her own violence. My father, Richard, stood by the altar, his face the color of old ash. He looked at the tiara, then at my scalp. And I saw the calculation behind his eyes fail. He realized, in that second, that he couldn't spin this. You can't spin a scar. I reached the altar. Ethan was waiting. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at me, and his eyes were fierce, steady anchors in the storm. He wasn't just a groom, he was my co-counsel, my partner in this dismantling. He held my hands, his thumbs brushing the pulse points on my wrists. My heart rate was steady. "Ready?" he whispered. "Burn it down," I said. I gave the nod. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. Not for a ring, but for his phone. He tapped the screen once. It was done. The digital guillotine dropped. Simultaneously, 300 pockets began to vibrate. The sound of notification pings rippled through the audience like hail hitting a tin roof. A few people reached for their phones instinctively, then a few more, then everyone. The email subject line was simple: the price of loyalty. Inside was the video file, the live stream capture. But we didn't just rely on them watching it individually. Ethan had synced the file to the reception's AV system, which was currently set up in the glass tent just yards away, speakers facing the ceremony seating. The audio cracked over the bluff, drowning out the wind. "Do it fast!" My father's voice boomed, distorted but unmistakable. "Before the sedative wears off." The guests froze. Senator Miller looked up from his phone, his eyes darting to my father. Then came the sound of the shears, the mechanical buzzing. And finally, Gabriella's voice, bright and cruel, narrating the torture. "Look at her. She looks like a shaved rat. This is what happens when you forget your place, Haley." Gabriella, standing as my maid of honor, dropped her bouquet. She looked at the speakers, then at me, her face crumbling from smug vanity into sheer terror. She realized that her vanity, her need to broadcast everything, had just handed the prosecution the murder weapon. The audio cut. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and final. I turned to the crowd. I didn't need a microphone. "My sister had a gambling debt," I said, my voice carrying over the wind. "My father had a reputation. And my mother had a pair of dog shears. They thought my silence was a renewable resource. They were wrong." I looked at Senator Miller. "I wouldn't take their money if I were you, Senator. It's tainted." The senator stood up. He didn't look at my father. He buttoned his jacket, turned his back on the altar, and walked away. It was the first domino. The donors followed. The socialites followed. The illusion of the dynasty didn't just crack, it vaporized. My father slumped onto the bench, an old man in a suit that no longer commanded respect. My mother was weeping, not for me, but for the social standing that was currently evaporating into the Atlantic fog. I looked at Ethan. "Let's go." We didn't run. Running implies fear, and I was done being afraid. We walked to the vintage convertible, waiting at the edge of the gravel drive, the engine idling with a low, steady thrum. Behind us, the shouts were getting louder, a cacophony of accusations and panic, but they sounded distant, like noise from a television left on in another room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the ruins to know the castle had fallen. I slid into the passenger seat. Ethan got in behind the wheel. He didn't say a word, just reached over and squeezed my hand once before shifting into gear. As we rolled down the long, winding driveway, passing the gatehouse and the manicured hedges that had been the boundaries of my prison for 29 years, I felt a physical sensation in my chest, a snap. The invisible chain that had tethered me to their approval, to their sickness, had finally broken. We drove until the gray shingles of the estate were swallowed by the fog. Only then did I pull out my phone. Not to check social media, I knew what was happening there. The video was already trending. The hashtags were already forming. I opened my banking app. Mr. Sterling hadn't lied. The numbers were there, black and stark against the white screen. The trust fund. My grandmother's legacy, which my parents had hoarded like a weapon to keep me compliant, was now entirely mine. It was enough money to never work again, enough money to disappear to a private island and drink vintage wine until I forgot my own name. But that wasn't the plan. I looked at the balance, and I didn't feel greedy. I felt like an architect looking at raw materials. "Pull over," I said. Ethan eased the car onto a scenic overlook. The ocean churned below us, wild and indifferent. I turned to him. "I'm not keeping it." He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "The money? I'm keeping enough to build my nursery, to build the life I earned. But the rest?" I looked back at the ocean. It's blood money. It was built on image, on lies, on the kind of silence that kills people. If I keep it just for myself, I'm no better than them. I'm just another dragon sitting on a pile of gold. This is the justice of the sower. Punitive justice is what happened at the altar, punishing the guilty. That feels good. But it's finite. It ends when the enemy falls. But the justice of the sower is about what comes after the fire. It's about taking the ashes of your trauma and using them to fertilize something new. It's about planting trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. "I'm starting a foundation," I told him. "A legal defense fund for victims of domestic coercion. For the daughters who are blackmailed into silence. For the sons who are threatened with disinheritance if they don't toe the line. I want to give them the one thing I didn't have until today. An exit strategy." Ethan smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly who he had married. "The Crown of Thorns Fund?" he suggested. "The Ironwood Initiative," I corrected. "Because we bend, but we don't break." The months that followed were quiet. The noise of the scandal stayed on the mainland. My parents were tied up in lawsuits, donors suing for fraud, the party committee investigating the misuse of funds. Gabriella was being investigated for illegal recording and distribution of sensitive material. A poetic irony that didn't escape me. They were consuming each other. I didn't watch. I was too busy digging. I spent my days in the earth, hands stained with soil, building the landscape architecture firm I'd always dreamed of. My hair grew back. It came in dark and thick, a short, fierce pixie cut that I didn't try to hide. I stopped wearing wigs. I stopped wearing hats. I let the sun touch my scalp. I remember standing in my greenhouse one morning, the smell of damp earth and growing things filling the air. I looked at a tray of seedlings I had propagated. They had started as cuttings severed from the parent plant, wounded, exposed. But in the right soil, away from the shadow of the canopy, they had rooted. They were thriving. I realized then that my family hadn't buried me. They had planted me. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, share this story. Let them know we aren't afraid of the fire anymore.